I've pretty much avoided learning math in Blender for like 7 years. And honestly, I very much regret that because this year I've finally wrapped my head fully around math nodes and it has taken my animations to just another level. So back a year ago when I was finally wrapping my head around them, there were 4 things within the math nodes and geometry nodes specifically that when I figured these out, it went a long way to adding way more control in my animations. And it was understanding what is the difference between vector math nodes and kind of the blue I'm calling regular math nodes. What is the difference between those two guys? And once I figured out how to use the add function and the multiply function, it was like a night and day difference on controlling all the components within my animations. I also just released a course that tackles these topics and so many more within geometry nodes. It's called the Intro to Geometry Nodes course. It's 5.5 hours long and it's cut into 2 sections. The first section, we're learning how to use geometry nodes through the lens of recreating things like deleting faces, like creating the displacement modifier, recreating the wireframe modifier, and really using geometry nodes to make everything procedural and give us way more power in our animations. And then the second half, we're taking all of that information and applying it to these really cool practical lessons so that you can learn further how these things work. If you want to check it out, it is going to be 25% off for the rest of this month using the code NEWGEO. You can check out the course linked below. So let's talk about those 4 things, and then we're going to create this animation so we can further solidify this information that we're learning. So first, let's tackle vector math. So in this example, I have a noise texture that's creating this effect in geometry nodes. If I plug a vector math node into that noise texture, we can now manipulate that noise texture on whatever axis that I want to manipulate it. Because the vector math node, he understands vector, which means he understands there is an X, Y, and Z space within our space. If I were to just get one of these blue regular math nodes and do the same thing, he doesn't understand vector, he doesn't understand X, Y, Z, and he's just going to combine them all and it's going to look horrible. But in this example, the X, Y, Z information is not entirely relevant for the function that I want to use math for. So the X, Y, Z information is already set up, so I could just use a regular blue math node and I want to say, hey, this up and down change that the wave texture is creating, well, I just want to make it stronger. So I'm going to use a regular math node. He can handle single values and we'll just make it stronger. So in conclusion, vector math node, he understands vector information and he can make changes based on that vector stuff. But sometimes XYZ information isn't even present when we're making certain things in geometry nodes or the shader editor, by the way. Sometimes we just need to do some math functions to stuff. And so in that case, we would not be using a vector math node for those contexts. So we would use the regular math node for those changes. All right, now let's talk about the multiply function and the add function. Amongst all the crazy functions in the math node, these two I use all the time. So let's talk about multiply. So in the example that we're going to build in a little bit, I used the noise texture to get these cubes to kind of move up and down and animate. But as you can see, when I animate it, they only go so high. There's no sort of strength slider on the noise texture. So multiply is that strength slider. What he does is take a thing that was created by another thing and make that stronger. So in this case, it's taking that up and down and we can strengthen it, go higher and lower, and it gives you that control. All right, now we can talk about add. I like to use add as a way to just get a thing that was originally static to move. So here, I used the position information and I threw it into the shader editor so we can see the position as black and white data, as value information. But I want to animate it as a transition from one texture to another. So we'll add a add function and that slider will allow it to move up and down. And a contrast, if we were to add a multiply function to this, it would just take that gradient and kind of stretch it up and down, and we don't want that. We just want it to simply stay the same, but move. Multiply is a strength or a multiplication of a function, and add just adds stuff to it. That's the easiest way I can explain it for just the basic understanding. Just like in the course I mentioned, I like to tell and then show. So let's build this animation, and there's going to be a few times in it where we're going to be using vector math, regular math, these add and multiply functions, and it's really going to help you understand it. So let's build this guy. All right, we are going to start out with the two models that are going to make up this whole animation. So first one is a cube, and we're just going to take him. We're going to hit tab. We're going to hit U for unwrap, and we're just going to click on cube projection. And then I want to go ahead and we'll leave him there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate him, and we're going to go here. I'm going to hit tab for edit mode. And then we are just going to kind of squish him to be right about that size. And he's going to be the one that's going to sit on top of him. So now what I want to do is just go ahead and bevel these guys. So we're going to get a bevel modifier and bevel him. There we go. And the bevel is one, I mean, everything should be beveled in 3D, but two, bevel especially looks really good when you are using subsurface materials. So that is sort of the bigger motivator as well. Bevel just looks really nice with subsurface. So now that these guys exist, I'm going to call him top and bottom. And then we're just going to go ahead, get a plane, and he's going to hold our geometry nodes node tree. So we can now head over to the geometry nodes workspace and build this whole thing out. So we're going to click new. I'm going to go ahead and delete the default input and get in a grid. We'll plug the grid right into geometry. And in this case, I'm going to click and drag, give this a size of 10 and the vertices as well of 10. And we can add in a instance on points node. And what we can do is first drag in that bottom cube, and we'll plug geometry right into instance. So now they're all just going to kind of merge together. I'm going to hit the tilde key and go to the top, and then I'm going to click and drag here on the scale until all of these cubes are just, have a little bit of margin in between each other, but they're not touching, but they're not too far apart either, to make it look the best. Now what I want to do is go ahead and hit Shift D on this instance on points node, plug in the cube, and then I'm going to duplicate the object info. And here I'm going to grab the top cube, plug geometry here, and then let's combine the two of them with a join geometry node, and we'll plug that right here. So you won't be able to see that new cube you introduced. We can kind of see it right here with some like shading error. But what we need to get is a transform geometry node, put him here so that we can actually move this guy up. So I just want to kind of place him right on top. So it just kind of looks like he's sitting there. Perfect. All right, so now, place him however you like him so that he's happy. And now we can go ahead and displace this guy with the texture to make him move up and down. But first, we're going to sort of create like that stair pattern. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down Control and right. I'm going to hold down Shift and right click and combine them so we can get a set position node. Now, the first node we're going to need is a position node, and we can plug him into a combined XYZ. Here's why the reason we need him is because we want access to this slider right here. We don't by default, so by adding this node, we now have access to that input. So we can plug him here, and it's going to do that by default. Now, this is what I'm wanting, but I have no control over how this looks, and that's what these math nodes are going to help. They help you change things that other things created, and by other things I mean the position node. The position node says based on the position of him and all of these guys together, starting here, going up, change them. Of course, it's changing their position based on the X, Y, and Z all together, which gives you this sort of diagonal stair. So I am going to turn on my outline, cavity, and shadow so this looks better. And we're going to get a vector math node, and we're going to add him to a multiply. The multiply, again, it allows you to adjust the strength of an effect, the effect being the position changing. So remember I said it combined all the X, Y, and Z to give that diagonal stare. If I just wanted this axis, we can just give it a stare like that, or we can create stairs like this. I happen to like the diagonal, so we're gonna leave it. So now we have that that position setup done, and we used a vector math because we need to change it based on X, Y, and Z, and we wanted to use a multiply so we can control the strength of the position effect. So what I want to do now is get another set position node so we can use a texture to kind of make them move up and down randomly. So of course I want to move them up and down based on the Z. So I'm going to get that combine XYZ node again. And then we're going to get in a noise texture. And this is the example I showed earlier in this video. So if I plug noise texture right into Z, and then we can go here to 4D. So we have an animatable slider. You can see that's working. We need to get a map range first so that we can sort of crunch out that texture. So give it a -1 on the 2 min. That's so that whenever we do animate it, the whole system stays in place and we just can make changes. Because if we leave it by default, it's going to sort of move the whole thing up and down based on the value. That's a very much in the weeds explanation, but you're just going to need the map range. So now, of course, I want to have, I'm going to give my scale of 2. I want to have some control over, how strong this effect is the exact same way we did here. But we already have the Z decided that it's going to be affecting up and down, so we don't need a vector math node. We just need a blue regular math node set to multiply again, and he is here. So I'm going to bring it probably around 0.35, maybe more. Yeah, that's more appropriate, I think. And then if we bring this here to 0, we can see how's that going to look when we first animate it here. It's kind of dramatic. Maybe something like this. Yeah, I like this. And then we're going to animate them to be like that. Okay, perfect. Sweet. And I'm going to bring my detail down to 0. Great. So now we have this whole system ready to be animated, so we can animate that later. Let's finish setting this guy up with some materials. So we are going to need one material, which is the material, well, we need 2, but specifically within geometry nodes, we need to get a set material node. Right over here, we'll create that new material and we'll call it top, and then we will call him right here. Now for this line, we could add another set material node, but I just want to add the same material to all of them. So what I can do is I'm going to click on the cube right here and just give him, I'm going to hit the period key and give him his own material. So we'll make it metallic, and then we'll head into shading and we'll start the shading process. So we have that bottom cube selected. So what I'm going to do is get a bump node, plug it into normal. We'll get a wave texture. And then if you have the node wrangler add-on enabled, you can hit Control T or search up a mapping node, a texture coordinate, and use the UV because we unwrapped this texture. And then we'll plug color right into height. So what I want is these vertical lines. So I'm going to give my distance at 0.1 so it's not super dramatic, and maybe bring my scale down a little bit. So now we have this look right here. So it's pretty nice. So now let's head back to geometry nodes. Click on the plane in your outliner, and I'm going to hit the period key just so I can look at it. Let's make sure that that material and the set material is set. So now we can add a material to the top portions of these top cubes. So let's head into shading. So make sure top is selected in your materials. And so what I want is a random color assigned to all of my cubes. So what we can do is, and we need that to sort of recognize and assign a random color to each cube. We need a little bit of information in geometry nodes to set that up. So we're going to get a store named attribute, and we're going to get a random value. And I want the store named attribute to recognize that they are individual instances. And that's why we are setting this up in the geometry nodes workspace, so that we'll be able to actually recognize the individual objects. The shader editor by default won't do that. And so we need to sort of set that up properly so it looks good. And then we'll plug random value here, and I'm going to use the letter R to remember that it's random. So we can head into shading, get an attribute to call that attribute, type in the letter R, and we want to recognize those instances. And then if we plug factor right into base color, you can see that it's working. So that's good. Let's go ahead. We'll get a hue. We're going to go ahead and get a color ramp so that we can give it some color. So let's just bring it in like this and bring it in like that. I'm going to go ahead and select a nice blue. I'm gonna hit Control C here and then hit Control V and then just give it a really dark color. So now we have a random distribution of value amongst all these colors, and maybe we can bring this guy back to make it less dramatic. And then at this point, I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna click on the camera icon, switch over to cycles, and I'm gonna switch this guy over to cycles and then hit this drop down and get some HDRIs just so we can see how this whole thing is looking. So on the subsurface, we're gonna bring our weight up. I'm gonna click and drag just so that they're all a value of 1, and then bring that scale up so we can get some nice subsurface materials. And then we can go ahead, get a bump node. Let's add a little bit of texture to these objects. So we're gonna go ahead and plug that into the normal, a distance of 0.1. We're gonna get a magic texture and plug color into the height. So now we get this nice little pattern, but I'm gonna bring that pattern to be pretty small. There we go. And then you can bring that strength down until you like it. Let's make that pattern even smaller. Okay, so now we have this guy nice and set up. What I wanna do is make another one of these, but with a different color, and then use a texture to transition from one color to another. What I know is if I go back to geometry nodes, there is a system that I set up that created that slope. And I know that that can be turned into black and white values because it was a value that created that change. This position node is what created that value. So what I can do is call it from geometry nodes. So let's get another store named attribute. I'm going from point to instance, and I'm going to type in GRAD, I'm gonna do lowercase grade just to remind me that it's a gradient. And then what you can do is pull this position right over here and plug it right into the value, and we are gonna actually be able to visualize the position data in a black and white texture, with a black and white texture, which is gonna be really cool. So make sure he's set to instance, and we can head back into shading right here. And let's go ahead and get a mix shader. I'm gonna hit Control Shift D so all of these guys stay connected. And then I'm gonna click on this color ramp, hit Control Shift D so he stays connected to the attribute, and we'll just plug him here. And we'll plug him here so we can get a mix of the two. And then what I'm gonna do is just get a hue saturation value node. And then I'm just gonna move it a little bit and then move my factor to the right so I can just view him. So maybe I can do, I guess a yellow and a blue would look really cool. So we'll do that, a yellow and a blue transition. And then now let's get that attribute for the instance here and type in GRAD. And then we'll call it right here. And then this is another example that I showed earlier in today's video where we were transitioning those two. Of course, now we can see the transition, but I want to be able to control it with a math node, and add is going to transition that color. So we'll sort of hold that off for now until we're ready to animate. So I'm going to go ahead and position my camera so that we can start to light this. So we're gonna go ahead and get a camera, Control-Alt-0, snap it to view, and then I'm gonna use in the camera settings, a orthographic perspective, and then do something like this. All right, cool. So now I just want to go ahead and light this scene. What I typically like to do is start out with a HDRI. So in my asset browser, I have the Polyhaven add-on, which gives you all of your HDRIs, or you can go to Polyhaven and grab a free HDRI. So Polyhaven has totally free HDRIs. The add-on that links to Blender is not free, so if you don't have it, you don't need to pay for it, and go ahead and just pick a random HDRI that you like. I'd prefer one that has cloudy sky, so there's soft shadows. I'm going to use specifically Modern Bathroom. If you search that up on their site, you'll be able to find it. So we'll grab him. All right, and then now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and get a area light, bring it up, and sort of angle him over here. And I'm gonna hit R twice. I'm hitting G and R to move the light around. We'll give it maybe a power of 1,000 right now. Bring that spread down to 0, and then bring your size to fill up the scene that it's shining down on. So now he's shining, and we're gonna use a texture to give it a little bit of life. So we're gonna head back into shading, and I'm gonna hit this drop down and bring my scene world scene lights back, and then we are in shading. Make sure the area light is selected in your outliner. We're gonna get a color ramp to control the texture, and then we're gonna get a noise texture and plug that into the color ramp. I'm gonna hit Control T and select my area light as sort of, I don't know, I guess the origin point would be the correct word, and then we're gonna use object, I think origin point. And then we'll just go ahead and go from linear to constant on our interpolation? On our color ramp. And then we can just scale this guy up until we get something that we like. Something like this. Bring that power to like 3,000. And then if you bring that spread back, it's going to soften the texture. So it gives it a little bit more of a natural look. And then bring that scale up again. And then just play with it. And then you can go from 3D to 4D so that you can animate the light and maybe bring a little bit more detail possibly. And now we'll get these really nice moments in our lighting. Maybe bring it in a little bit so there's fewer highlights. And then play with the brightness of your HDRI along with the brightness of your area light to figure out how you want your lighting to look. I'm pretty happy with this just for the recording of this video. And then when you're ready to animate, I'm just gonna go ahead, I'm gonna hit I on the W, go to the very end, and then just give it a little bit of movement for our animation. So that's animated, we can just sort of step away from that. And then I'm gonna click on the object, and we'll go here to geometry nodes. And let's go ahead and animate all of this stuff. So I'm gonna go to edit, preferences, and go from linear here to, we're gonna go here to a Bezier right here. And then let's go ahead, I'm gonna start at maybe frame 10. I'm gonna hit I on the vector math, maybe go to right about there, and then bring it to something like this, hit I, and then I'm just gonna delete the single keyframe on this bottom one. All right, cool, so he is animated. He's probably too quick, but we will tweak that in a minute. All right, so we'll have that, and then he'll kind of move around, and then we'll hit I again, back to 0. Okay, so we kind of have this. Sweet. And then we'll give it a sort of constant life, and that's going to be this noise texture. So bring your preferences back to a linear interpolation for the W here. Go here, maybe to frame 120, and just sort of animate the W to whatever speed. Just like that, and then we'll stop our animation at 120, so we'll do our end of 120. Sweet. And then we need to animate the material. So we'll head back into shading, and you can actually view the material change in EV, so it'll be a little bit easier on your viewport. So we'll start at blue, and then right when he starts to move, we'll transition the color change. So move that value node. And then once he starts to move again, move that value node back to blue. And it might be too quick, but you get the idea. You can sort of play with how that looks. Sweet. And let's see how the yellow looks in the light. Oh, he looks so cool. Very fall, actually, which is a perfect sign of the times. All right, we're pretty much finished. We're done. This is how we're using math to create this really interesting animation. He's all done. He's beautiful. I would render it out at about 300 samples denoised, and then make sure you, in your printer, go ahead and I'd keep it at a PNG sequence. Pick your file, render animation, and you'll have a really cool animation similar to mine. All right, let's see if we can move over and conclude this video with Cindy in my lap. Yeah, so that is a bit of an overview on using math and how even basic math can be used to make just really cool animations and allow you to have more control in geometry nodes that you otherwise wouldn't have, which would mean you otherwise couldn't make these really cool and super useful animations that you can use in your client work, in your personal work, anything like that. And the mic is covering Cindy's face. We can't have that. But yeah, with that being said, if you do want to learn more about these concepts and really feel comfortable in this space of using math and using geometry nodes, my course just launched. It's going to be 25% off for the remainder of this month. You can use the code NEWGEO at checkout, linked in the description of this video. Thank you guys for watching. Hope you learned something really cool that you can apply to your own work, and I'll see you in the next one.